This story happened when I was living in Detroit. I worked in the logistics department at one of the large warehouses. Almost every day after my shift, on my way home, I would stop by a small cafe I liked. It always smelled like coffee and fresh waffles. I'd have dinner there and then sit for a while with my laptop, working on a small personal project that eventually allowed me to quit my main job. That evening, I stayed at the cafe longer than usual. Outside, a light but steady rain was falling. The weather was so miserable that I didn't want to step outside at all. Eventually, a server came over and let me know they were about to close. I put my laptop into my backpack, paid the bill, and walked out. A gust of wind pushed the rain straight into my face. I looked around. To the right of the entrance was a brightly lit street. To the left was a narrow, long alley with a single streetlight somewhere deep inside it. The light barely illuminated anything, only stretching long shadows from the trash bins nearby. Suddenly, a strange sound came from the depths of the alley, like a plastic bin being knocked over. I focused my eyes and noticed some movement in the darkness. Someone was there. A moment later, I heard a woman scream and saw a girl running out of the alley toward the light. Without slowing down, she crossed the lit area and ran straight toward me. When she was almost next to me, I saw her terrified face. Her hair was stuck to her skin, her jacket was unzipped, and her hands were shaking. She was desperately pointing back toward the alley and saying something in broken fragments. She was clearly in shock. I couldn't make out what she was trying to say, but from her condition it was obvious that someone was back there, and she was terrified of him. When she reached me, she didn't stop beside me. Instead, she immediately tried to hide behind my back. I felt her fingers dig into my sleeve. The next moment, a man stepped out of the darkness of the alley. I can't say exactly where he came from. I only noticed him when he reached the dim circle of the streetlight. As he got closer, I was able to see him clearly. He was very tall, noticeably taller than anyone I usually saw. Later, I estimated his height at around 6'6", maybe 6'7". He was thin, almost gaunt. He was wearing dark clothes, which made him blend even more into the night. His face was hidden in the shadow of a baseball cap. I couldn't see his eyes, and that was the worst part. You couldn't tell where he was looking or what he was reacting to. He stopped about 5 or 6 feet away and just stood there. I noticed his head twitching, like a nervous tick. His hands were twitching too, small movements, not from the cold, but from some kind of inner tension. He wasn't looking around. He wasn't trying to run or hide. He didn't act like a thief who had been startled. He just stood there, calm and confident. In his right hand, I noticed a small knife. I tried to talk to him, to understand what was going on, who he was, and why he was following this girl. He didn't respond. His silence only made the situation more tense, and it felt like he tightened his grip on the knife. It was as if he was sizing me up. Behind me, the girl started breathing faster, on the verge of a panic attack. I couldn't see her face, but I felt her grip on my arm growing tighter. I was completely soaked by then, but the stress was so intense that I barely noticed the rain or the wind. I slowly began stepping backward. At the same moment, the man with the knife took a step forward, then another one. I realized I had to act fast. I glanced behind me at the cafe door I had walked out of just 5 minutes earlier. Grabbing the girl by the hand, I rushed back toward the cafe. I shoved the door open with all my strength, and we stumbled inside. Warm air hit my face. I slammed the door shut and immediately leaned my shoulder against it when I saw the man sprinting toward us. He reached the door just seconds after I closed it, but I managed to hold it and lock the latch. He threw himself against the door, then punched the glass panel with his fist. It held. He hit it again, then kicked it. The sound was dull and heavy. Most of the cafe's front and the door itself were made of glass, and we could see him clearly, soaked, towering, with the knife still in his hand. When he stood right up against the door, I finally saw his eyes. They were dark, and his stare was piercing. The noise drew the attention of the staff. A server and someone else rushed out from the back. One of them shouted that they were calling the police. The man kept pounding on the door. His fists left wet marks on the glass. I thought about how the door might not hold, and I understood that if he got inside, we would be trapped in that small space. Then, suddenly, he stopped. He took a few steps back and stood still. Rain dripped from the brim of his cap. His head was still twitching with that same nervous tick. Then he turned around and walked back into the alley. Step by step, he disappeared into the darkness. For a brief second, the streetlight caught his back, and then he was gone. I looked to the side and saw one of the employees nervously staring out the window. The girl was still clinging to me, as if she couldn't believe the danger was over. I didn't try to ask her anything. What I had already seen was more than enough. The police arrived fairly quickly, but when they checked the alley, there was no one there. An ambulance arrived later. They examined the girl and took her away. I never learned her name. I live in the mountainous state of Colorado, where the weather can change in 10 minutes. I work as a construction worker for a local company. That evening, I was driving home late from a construction site. It was already dark, and a light, unpleasant rain was falling. Between the darkness and the rain, visibility was poor. Occasionally, cars passed in the opposite lane, but for the most part, I was driving alone. I knew this route well. I'd been using it for the past few months. Normally, at one fork in the road, where it split in two directions, I always turned left, where the road went downhill. That night, however, there was a sign saying the road was closed due to construction, with a 5-mile detour. What struck me as strange was that I had driven that same road earlier that morning, and there had been no construction at all. The pavement was in perfect condition. It didn't make sense. Still, I turned right and followed the detour as indicated. The rain picked up, and visibility got worse. My headlights caught the wet asphalt and the shoulder of the road. No cars, no people. I was exhausted after a long workday and just wanted to get home as quickly as possible. The road started climbing immediately. It narrowed. The curb gave way to gravel, and the trees closed in tighter around it. My navigation system showed something, but the signal was weak, and the map lagged behind. I had to ease off the gas and drive slower. 10 minutes passed, and I was still going uphill. I had never driven this road before, and had no idea where it led. It felt strange and deserted. According to the detour sign, I should have already rejoined my usual route. On my normal drive, I would at least pass a few houses or see occasional signs. Here, there was nothing. No signs, no buildings, just forest and road. Coming around another bend, I saw a car. It was stopped right in the middle of the road, with its hazard lights on. The lights blinked through the rain, reflecting off the wet asphalt. A man was crouched near the front wheel, as if he were working on it. I slowed down and stopped about 40 feet away, leaving the engine running. The man stood up and turned toward me. He was wearing a dark jacket with the hood up, his face hard to see. He pointed at the wheel and made a few gestures that suggested he had a flat tire. He used only one hand. The other stayed hidden behind his back. That immediately caught my attention. It felt wrong. I watched him from inside my car, and a sense of unease crept in. There was something off about him. I switched on my high beams, and that erased any remaining doubt. The tire was fine. It wasn't flat. There was no visible damage, no cut in the sidewall, no bent rim. The man started walking toward me, still keeping one hand behind his back. I shifted into reverse and began slowly rolling backward, carefully, since visibility in my side mirrors was limited. When he realized I was backing away, he suddenly broke into a run. In the next second, the hand he'd been hiding snapped forward. He was holding a gun. He ran straight toward me, closing the distance, shouting something I couldn't make out. I couldn't turn around quickly on that narrow, wet road. I needed to get another 150 feet downhill to a small pullout I had noticed on the way up. I couldn't reverse fast. The rain and darkness made it too risky. He was getting closer. I could see him aiming the gun at me. Then I remembered the extra lights mounted on the roof of my car. I had installed them a couple of years earlier, but rarely used them, usually only in the mountains or deep in the woods, where there were no other vehicles. I turned them on. The light hit so suddenly that even I was blinded for a split second, despite being inside the car. The road ahead, the stopped vehicle, the forest, everything turned into a white blur. I saw the man instinctively raise a hand to his face and stumble. That was enough. I reversed to the wider section of the road and turned around. I hit the gas. The car skidded, and I felt the rear end slide toward the shoulder, toward the drop-off. My stomach dropped. I eased off the accelerator, and the car straightened out. I drove back downhill as fast as I could. I kept the extra lights on for another minute, my hands shaking, convinced he might not be alone, and that someone else could be waiting around the next curve. Eventually, I reached the familiar fork in the road. I slowed down, drove past the sign warning of road work ahead, and continued along my usual route. When I finally got home, it hit me just how close I had come to walking into someone's trap. I still don't know what that man wanted, to rob me or something much worse. The road started climbing immediately. It narrowed, the curb gave way to gravel, and the trees closed in tighter around it. This happened last fall, when my parents went away for the weekend to visit relatives, and I decided to stay home. Our house sits on the very edge of the neighborhood, almost at the end of the street. It's a quiet area, a quiet street. I don't really like being alone, but that week had been exhausting, and I didn't feel like going out or doing anything. According to the forecast, the evening was supposed to be rainy and gloomy anyway. My boyfriend, whom I'd been dating for about a year, was on duty that night. He works as a firefighter. When evening came, I poured myself a glass of wine, wrapped up in a blanket, and put on a movie. It felt like it was going to be a cozy night. About halfway through the movie, after my second glass of wine, I got hungry and decided to go to the kitchen to grab something to eat. Our kitchen was right next to the front door. Between them was a short hallway, a rug, a small shelf for keys. I opened the fridge, took out a container of food, and was about to turn on the microwave when I heard a sharp, dull sound. It sounded like something heavy had fallen and shattered. The noise came from the direction of the front door. At first, I couldn't even understand what it was. Maybe the wind had knocked something over. But when I glanced out the window, I saw that the leaves on the trees were barely moving, just from the light rain. There was almost no wind. I froze, standing there with the food container in my hands, listening. All I could hear was the rain. I set the food down on the table and went into the hallway. I checked the front door. It was locked. I leaned toward the peephole and looked outside. There was no one on the porch. In the glow of the porch light, I could see the wet walkway and the dark yard. I noticed some object near the edge of the porch, but I couldn't tell what it was. After watching through the peephole for a few more seconds, I carefully unlocked the door and opened it just enough to see the threshold and part of the porch. On the edge of the doorstep lay our flower pot, broken. It was a large, heavy pot with a geranium that had been sitting by the wall next to the door all summer. It was solid and heavy, and now it was lying right at the threshold, as if someone had thrown it or shoved it there, with soil and shards scattered around. A chill ran through me. It couldn't have ended up there on its own. Someone had broken it. Someone had been here moments earlier. I closed the door. My hands were shaking. I stood in the hallway, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do in a situation like this. I went back to the kitchen, but my appetite was gone. At that moment, lightning flashed, and thunder cracked so loudly that I flinched and instinctively crouched. Another flash lit up the kitchen in white light for a second. Then everything went dark again, except for the dim yellow glow of the lights above the counter. After calming down a little, I still reheated the food. I returned to the living room and turned the movie back on, hoping it might distract me, then turned the TV volume down slightly and sat there, listening. 10 or 15 minutes passed. Between the steady rain outside and the low sound of the TV, I almost dozed off when lightning flashed again, followed immediately by a loud roll of thunder, and in that flash of light, I saw a shadow in the window. A clear silhouette of a person appeared on the glass near the curtain. He was tall and stood completely still. He seemed to be wearing some kind of raincoat. He was standing so close to the house that his shadow fell across the window when the lightning lit up behind him. The lightning flashed again a few seconds later. The silhouette was still there. A third flash. He hadn't moved. My chest tightened, and immediately I thought of the broken flower pot by the door. I grabbed my phone and called my boyfriend. The line was busy. I tried again, still busy. I sent several messages in a row. They remained unread. I sat on the couch, staring at the window, afraid to move. A minute passed, maybe two. Then there was a knock at the door, barely audible, quiet. I turned off the TV, and the room became even quieter. I could hear the rain hitting the gutters, water dripping somewhere off the roof. I sat perfectly still, trying not to even breathe too loudly. I listened. The knock came again, just as quiet, slow. It wasn't a normal knock. It felt deliberate, like some kind of psychological pressure. It was deeply unsettling. Realizing I was home alone, I almost screamed, but at the last second I covered my mouth with my hand. I quietly stood up and went upstairs. In my bedroom, I locked the door and slid a small nightstand in front of it. Then, I sat on the floor next to the bed and tried calling my boyfriend again. The line was still busy. My messages were still unread. Maybe he'd been dispatched to a call and couldn't answer. I stayed there almost until morning. I barely slept. Every time thunder rolled, I woke up and flinched. When it finally started to get light outside, I worked up the courage to go downstairs. I moved slowly, as if someone might be waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs. But there was no one there. Everything was in its place. The doors were locked. The windows were intact. It looked as if nothing had happened. I went to the front door and looked through the peephole. No one. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The yard was a mess. Not completely destroyed, but clearly disturbed. The flower pot was still broken by the doorstep, the soil washed around by the rain. A small garden stool was tipped over nearby. One of the lightweight plastic chairs from the backyard had been moved closer to the path. Under the living room window, some small items that were usually kept against the wall were scattered. And there, on a patch of ground where the grass had been worn away, were many boot prints. Someone had stood there for a long time. The ground beneath them had almost turned to mud. The tracks were fresh because the rain hadn't stopped until dawn, and if they'd been left even a couple of hours earlier, they would have been washed away. Someone had been there all night, and left only when morning came. The worst part was that there were no clear answers. Nothing was stolen, nothing was broken, except the flower pot. I still don't know who walked around my house that night, or what his motives were, and that is what frightens me the most.